Thomas Harrington slammed open the door to his father's Upper East Side penthouse, expecting to find the old man reviewing quarterly reports like always. Instead, he froze at the sight of Charles locked in a tender embrace with a disheveled young man on the couch, their lips meeting in a kiss that spoke of years of suppressed longing. The world spun around Thomas as he dropped his briefcase, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "Dad? What the hell is this?" Charles pulled back slowly, his face paling beneath the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. The young man, no older than 30, scrambled to his feet, his faded hoodie and torn jeans marking him as someone who clearly did not belong in this marble and glass world. Thomas's mind raced through every possible explanation, none of them fitting the image burned into his retinas. His father, the stoic widower who had built an empire and raised him with iron discipline, kissing another man? A homeless stranger at that? "Thomas, I can explain," Charles said, his voice steady but laced with something Thomas had never heard before: vulnerability. The young man kept his eyes down, fists clenched at his sides, as if ready to bolt. Thomas felt his chest tighten, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. This was not how his day was supposed to go. He had flown in from San Francisco to discuss the merger that would make Harrington Tech the undisputed leader in AI, not to walk into what looked like a betrayal of everything their family stood for. Charles stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the younger man's shoulder. "This is Jordan. He's important to me." The words hung there, simple yet devastating. Thomas laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even him. "Important? Dad, Mom's been gone 5 years and you're—" "What?" "Picking up strays off the street." Jordan flinched, but did not speak, his green eyes flicking up for the briefest second, revealing a depth of pain that made Thomas pause despite his fury. The penthouse, with its sweeping views of Central Park, suddenly felt like a stage for a tragedy Thomas had not auditioned for. He had always admired his father's strength, the way Charles had buried his grief and continued building after losing Thomas's mother to cancer. Now that image cracked wide open. Thomas paced the room, his custom Italian shoes clicking against the hardwood. "I came here to celebrate the biggest deal of our lives, not to find you with him." He gestured at Jordan without looking, afraid what he might see in the man's face. Charles sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "Sit down, son. This isn't what you think." But Thomas could not sit. His mind flooded with memories of family dinners, church on Sundays, the expectation that Harrington men were pillars of tradition. He had spent his entire life molding himself into that mold, even proposing to Elena last month because it looked right on paper. Now the foundation was crumbling. Jordan remained silent, shifting his weight from one scuffed sneaker to the other, the faint smell of the streets still clinging to his clothes. Outside, the city hummed on, oblivious. Inside, Thomas felt the first crack in the armor he had worn since college. He had buried questions about himself for years, telling himself it was just stress, just ambition. Seeing his father like this forced those questions to the surface, raw and unignorable. "How long?" he demanded, voice cracking. Charles met his gaze without flinching. "Long enough to know this is real." The simplicity of the answer hit harder than any shout could have. Thomas turned away, staring at the skyline, wondering how many other truths he had missed in the glittering life he had built. The afternoon stretched into hours of tense silence, broken only by the occasional city siren. Jordan finally spoke, his voice low and rough from disuse. "I didn't ask for any of this, Mr. Harrington. Your father helped me when no one else would." Thomas spun back, eyes narrowing. "Help?" This looked like more than charity. He wanted to throw the man out, write a check, make the problem disappear. But something in Jordan's steady stare held him back. Charles watched them both, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. For the first time in decades, he felt the relief of not hiding, even if it meant losing the son he loved more than anything. Thomas left that night without another word, the penthouse door closing behind him like a final punctuation. In the elevator, he leaned against the mirrored wall, heart hammering. The merger documents in his briefcase suddenly felt meaningless. One kiss had upended 35 years of certainty. He did not know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a journey that would force him to confront the man he had been running from his entire life, himself. The next morning found Thomas in his midtown office, staring at the same merger contract he had flown across the country to finalize. His assistant, Marcus, a sharp-dressed 30-year-old with a quick smile, set a coffee on the desk. "You look like you saw a ghost, boss." Thomas forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Family stuff. Nothing I can't handle." But the image of his father and Jordan refused to fade. He had spent the night in his own sleek Tribeca loft, pacing until dawn, replaying every conversation with Charles over the last 5 years. How had he missed the signs? By noon, curiosity, or maybe desperation, drove him back to the penthouse. He let himself in with the spare key, half hoping the scene had been a dream. Instead, he found Charles and Jordan at the kitchen island, sharing a simple breakfast of eggs and toast. Jordan wore one of Charles's old sweaters now, the sleeves too long, but his posture was straighter, less guarded. "You're back," Charles said quietly, pouring a third cup of coffee without asking. Thomas sat, the leather stool creaking under his weight. "I need to understand. Start from the beginning." Charles glanced at Jordan, who nodded once. The story unfolded slowly, each word a revelation. Charles had known he was gay since his 20s, but the pressure of building the family business, marrying Thomas's mother, and raising a son had forced him into silence. "Your mother knew," he admitted, voice thick. "We had an understanding. She loved me enough to let me hide." Thomas felt the floor tilt. His perfect parents, the golden couple in every society page, had lived a lie for his sake. Jordan listened without interrupting, his hand resting lightly on Charles's arm, a gesture so natural it made Thomas's chest ache with something he could not name. The truth about Jordan came next. Kicked out at 19, when his conservative Ohio family discovered his orientation, he had survived on New York streets for nearly a decade. Odd jobs, shelters, the constant fear of violence. Charles had met him 6 months ago at a charity event for homeless youth, where Jordan was volunteering despite having nothing himself. "He reminded me of who I was before fear took everything," Charles said. Jordan added softly, "He gave me a job first, cleaning the building. Then, more. No grand romance, just two men finding safety in each other when the world offered none." Thomas listened, anger giving way to a quiet storm of questions. He thought of his own life, the women he dated for appearances, the nights he lay awake wondering why nothing felt right. Elena's face flashed in his mind, her engagement ring still in his safe. "I thought I was doing what you wanted," he whispered. Charles reached across the table. "I wanted you happy, son, not trapped like I was." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through Thomas's carefully constructed world. That afternoon, the three men walked Central Park, the late autumn leaves crunching underfoot. Passers-by saw only a wealthy family out for air, but tension hummed between them. Jordan shared stories of shelter life, the friends lost to cold or addiction, the small kindnesses that kept him going. Thomas found himself listening, really listening, for the first time. When a jogger stared too long at Charles and Jordan walking close, Thomas stepped between them instinctively, protective in a way that surprised him. Back at the penthouse, he stayed for dinner. Simple pasta Jordan insisted on cooking. The normalcy felt revolutionary. Yet misunderstandings lingered. Thomas still wondered if Jordan was using his father for money. He ran a discreet background check that night, finding nothing but a string of bad luck and one sealed juvenile record for trespassing. The report only deepened his unease. How could he judge when his own secrets pressed against his ribs? Sleep came in fragments, dreams mixing his father's kiss with memories of a college roommate whose laugh still haunted him. By morning, Thomas knew he could not walk away. The merger could wait. His family, fractured as it was, could not. Weeks blurred into a delicate dance of tentative trust. Thomas canceled meetings, ignored Elena's concerned texts, and spent more time at the penthouse than in his own office. Charles seemed lighter, laughing more freely, while Jordan slowly shed the wary edge that street life had carved into him. They talked late into the nights, unpacking decades of silence. Thomas learned how Charles had watched him date women, biting back advice he feared would break their bond. "I didn't want you to carry my shame," Charles confessed one evening over whiskey. Thomas stared into his glass. "It wasn't shame, Dad. It was fear." "Mine too." The first real conflict erupted when Thomas's business partner, Victor Lang, dropped by unannounced. Victor, a conservative investor whose family fortune rivaled theirs, caught sight of Jordan cooking in the kitchen and raised an eyebrow. "New staff." The question dripped with implication. Thomas felt heat rise in his cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from a fierce protectiveness he had never expected. "He's family," he said flatly. Victor left with a tight smile and a promise to discuss the optics later. That night, Thomas paced the terrace, city lights glittering below like accusations. Jordan joined him quietly. "I can leave if I'm causing problems." Thomas turned, really seeing the man for the first time, the quiet strength in his posture, the kindness in his eyes. "No, you're staying." The turning point arrived during a surprise visit from Elena. She arrived with wedding magazines, her perfume filling the foyer. Charles greeted her warmly, but Jordan stayed in the guest room, sensing the tension. When Thomas finally told her the truth in the library, her reaction was swift. "Your father? And that? Boy, Thomas, think of the board, the shareholders." Her words echoed the voice in his head he had fought for years. He ended the engagement that night. The ring returned without drama. Elena left in tears, but Thomas felt only relief, as if a weight he had carried since college had finally dropped. Jordan found him on the roof later, staring at the stars. "You didn't have to do that for us." Thomas shook his head. "I did it for me." They sat in silence as the city pulsed below. For the first time, Thomas allowed himself to name the feelings stirring when Jordan's shoulder brushed his, the same warmth he had denied in every past relationship. Charles watched from the doorway, saying nothing, but his eyes held pride and understanding. Work suffered. The merger stalled as Thomas missed calls, his focus fractured. Board members whispered about his personal issues. One afternoon, Victor cornered him in the conference room. "Fix this, Thomas, or the deal dies." The threat should have terrified him. Instead, it clarified everything. That evening, he brought Charles and Jordan to his office, introducing them openly. "This is my family," he told the stunned team. "Accept it or find another company." The room fell silent, but Marcus, his assistant, smiled first. Small victories mattered. As winter approached, the three men built new routines. Jordan enrolled in night classes using money Charles had quietly set aside, studying social work to help others like him. Charles began volunteering at the same shelter where they met, his presence a quiet revolution in elite circles. Thomas watched them both, learning what courage looked like at any age. Yet the internal storm raged on. He still avoided mirrors, afraid of the man staring back, the one who wanted more than friendship with someone who had already given his heart to Charles. The misunderstanding peaked when Thomas overheard Jordan thanking Charles for saving my life. Jealousy flared hot and ugly until Jordan pulled him aside. "Your dad gave me safety. You're giving me hope." The words lingered long after. Christmas lights twinkled along Fifth Avenue as Thomas navigated the crowds, bags of gifts in hand. He had invited both men to his loft for the holiday, a neutral ground away from the penthouse memories. Jordan arrived first, carrying a small wrapped box, his new coat fitting perfectly. "Didn't know what to get a billionaire," he joked, but his smile was genuine. Charles followed soon after, carrying wine and the quiet confidence of a man no longer hiding. They cooked together, laughter filling the space Thomas had once thought too empty. The conversation turned serious over dessert. Jordan spoke of his mother, who had died before she could accept him, and the letters he still wrote but never sent. Charles shared stories of his own youth, stolen glances in locker rooms, the fear that had nearly destroyed him. Thomas listened, then spoke for the first time about the college roommate whose departure had left a hole he could never explain. "I told myself it was nothing," he admitted. Jordan's hand found his under the table, a brief squeeze that sent warmth racing up his arm. Charles noticed, but said nothing, only smiled into his wine. New Year's Eve brought the next test. Thomas's company hosted its annual gala at the plaza. He insisted Charles and Jordan attend as his guests. Whispers followed them through the ballroom, but Thomas kept his head high. When Victor approached with thinly veiled threats about company image, Thomas pulled him aside. "This is who I am now. Take your money elsewhere if you can't handle it." The words felt like freedom. Later, on the balcony overlooking the fireworks, Jordan stood close. "You're braver than I ever was at your age." Thomas turned, their faces inches apart. The moment stretched, charged with possibility, until Charles joined them, breaking the spell with a toast to new beginnings. January brought snow and deeper conversations. Jordan moved into a small studio Charles helped him secure, insisting on paying rent from his part-time job. Thomas visited often, bringing takeout and stories from the office. One night, as snow blanketed the city, Jordan asked the question Thomas had dreaded. "What do you want, Thomas?" "Not for your dad, not for the company. For you." The answer came unbidden. To stop running. They talked until dawn, mapping dreams Thomas had buried, travel, art, maybe even love without shame. Charles called the next morning, sensing the shift. "I'm proud of you, son. Whatever comes next." Misunderstandings still surfaced. When Elena's brother, a tabloid journalist, hinted at a story about Harrington family secrets, Thomas confronted the threat head-on, offering an exclusive interview instead. He spoke openly about his father's courage and his own journey, the article going viral. Support poured in from unexpected places, employees, competitors, even strangers online. Jordan read the piece aloud one evening, voice thick. "You didn't have to do this." Thomas replied simply, "I wanted to." Spring arrived with new growth. Thomas restructured the company, adding diversity initiatives that honored Jordan's experiences. Charles retired fully, dedicating time to advocacy. The three men traveled to Vermont for a weekend, hiking trails where no one knew their names. On a quiet overlook, Charles placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "This is what I always wanted for us." Thomas felt tears he had not shed since childhood. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time, he walked it without fear. Summer heat blanketed New York as Thomas stood on the balcony of his New Hamptons house, watching Charles and Jordan walk the beach below. The merger had closed successfully after all, Victor ultimately backing down under public pressure. Thomas had used the windfall to fund a foundation for LGBTQ youth, naming it after his mother in a gesture that brought Charles to tears. Jordan worked there part-time, his social work degree nearly complete, helping kids who reminded him of his younger self. Yet Thomas's internal journey deepened. Nights alone brought dreams of Jordan's laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he teased. He fought the feelings, telling himself it was gratitude, not love. Charles noticed during a quiet dinner. "You don't have to choose between us, son." The words unlocked something. Thomas spent the next week in therapy, unpacking years of denial. When he finally admitted the truth to Jordan on a rainy afternoon in the foundation office, the response was gentle. "I felt it too. But your dad, he's my home now." The honesty stung, yet freed them both to build something new, friendship forged in fire. A crisis tested them all when Jordan's estranged father appeared, demanding money and spewing old hatred. Thomas stepped in, hiring lawyers and standing beside Jordan in court. The judge ruled in their favor, but the emotional toll was heavy. Charles held Jordan through the nightmares that followed, while Thomas organized security and quiet support. "We're family," he told Jordan afterward. "No one touches you again." The declaration marked a turning point, the three men bound tighter than blood. Fall brought reflection. Thomas sold his Tribeca loft, moving closer to the penthouse. He dated tentatively, a kind architect named Liam who understood his complicated world. Charles and Jordan celebrated their first anniversary quietly, a small dinner where Thomas gave a toast that left them all laughing and crying. The company thrived under new values, diversity becoming its greatest strength. Thomas spoke at industry events about authenticity, his voice steady where once it would have shaken. One crisp October evening, the three men returned to the original penthouse. Jordan cooked the same simple pasta from their first shared meal. Charles raised a glass. To the truths that set us free. Thomas looked at them both, the father who had finally lived honestly and the man who had taught him what courage looked like. The journey had cost them illusions, but given them something richer, real connection. As leaves fell outside, Thomas realized the greatest gift was not the money or the power, but the permission to love without shame. Winter returned, closing the circle. Thomas stood in the same living room where everything began, now filled with holiday warmth. Charles and Jordan decorated a modest tree, their laughter echoing off the walls. Thomas watched, heart full. The past year had transformed them all. Charles walked taller, no longer carrying the weight of secrets. Jordan had graduated and started a full-time role at the foundation, mentoring dozens of young men finding their way. Thomas had embraced his identity openly, his relationship with Liam growing steady and true. Yet one final truth remained. On Christmas Eve, Thomas pulled Jordan aside. "Thank you for everything." Jordan smiled, the street-hardened edges long gone. "We saved each other." Charles joined them, the three men forming a circle of quiet strength. Outside, snow fell softly on the city that had witnessed their pain and their triumph. Thomas thought of the boy he had been, terrified of his own heart, and the man he had become, unafraid. The story did not end with perfect resolution. Board members still grumbled occasionally, old friends distanced themselves, and Jordan's past occasionally cast long shadows. But they faced it together, choosing honesty over comfort every time. Thomas's foundation expanded nationwide, changing lives far beyond their own. Charles published a quiet memoir under a pen name, inspiring countless men his age to stop hiding. Jordan spoke at shelters, his voice steady as he told his story without shame. As the clock struck midnight, Charles looked at his son. "Was it worth it?" Thomas answered without hesitation. "Every second." They hugged, the embrace carrying years of unspoken love. Jordan watched, part of the family now, in every way that mattered. The city lights glittered below, indifferent yet somehow approving. In the end, Thomas understood that love between men was never simple, but it was always worth the fight. The journey had rewritten his life, not with scandal, but with truth. And as he stood between the two men who had shown him the way, he knew the best chapters were still ahead. Is hiding your true self for the sake of family, love, a noble sacrifice, or a tragic betrayal? True or false?